Hello and welcome as we continue our look at A.K. Warder's Grammar Guide, An Introduction to Pali. If you're new and you don't already have a copy, there's a link to the source text down in the description. And today we'll be looking at Lesson 6. This is Pali Studies on the Learn Pali channel. Lesson 6 begins with the imperative. Although Warder labels this a tense, it's actually a verbal mood or mode. Imperatives are another way of making commands or giving instructions. And we use the imperative all the time when we want to tell somebody to do something, such as come here, go away, be quiet, hurry up, watch out. And this form of expression in linguistics is called the imperative mood. Warder gives us forms from the stem bhava as a paradigm, and from this we can see that the imperative endings for the first person and the second person plural are the same as those that we've already seen, with the present indicative. But in the third person, the imperative ends with to rather than t, and for A-stem nouns like bhava and those of the first conjugation, the second person singular is frequently just the bare stem itself without an ending. But if we look at some more examples, we can see that for some verbs in A, the ending he is taken, and the preceding vowel a is lengthened, just as in the first person. And for all other verb stems, those ending in vowels other than an a, they all take the he ending in the second person. So we can now extract a set of specific imperative endings. Notice that special symbol in the second person. That means a null ending, which results in just the bare stem. And also in the third person plural, any long A stem is shortened. Okay, these are the forms that we have to remember. So let's now look at some examples of how the imperative is used. As instructions are normally given directly to somebody else, the most common forms of the imperative are in the second person. So let's start with these. Videhi means speak, and in English the imperative is often marked with an exclamation mark, and the second person subject, you, is frequently left implied. And as well as commands, it's common to form prohibitions with the imperative too, using the negative particle ma, like we saw in the last lesson. Now in Pali, emphasis is given to words at the beginning of the sentence, and so the imperative verb is often first. And it's also frequently used with names, which are in the vocative case, to address a person directly. And these often follow immediately after the verb. And we can see that as well as straight commands, the imperative begins to border on that of request. And this is especially true as we come to look at the third person. So, gachantu literally means they go. But we can see that the third person has a slightly milder implication, making it more of a request. They must go, or they can go. The third person imperative, however, is more likely to be used with the name of a person being asked to do something, as in, may the Blessed One teach the Dharma. And finally, if we look at the first person imperative, these are quite rare, as it's quite hard to give a command to yourself. But when they do occur, they translate something like a plea or an incitement to action. May we go, or let us go, or as a wish, may I live long. But as these have exactly the same forms as the first person indicative, we have to guess from the context of the sentence whether to use let us go or just we go. So from this brief look we can see the second person is used for commands and requests, the third person is used for requests and polite invitations, and the first person, although rare, indicates a wish or a desire. Well, let's stick with verbs for a moment and jump ahead to the formation of the sixth class of verb stems. First, I just want to say that it's not really that important to understand how verb stems are formed from a verbal root. And I'd also like to add a caution on the numbering scheme, as what Warder here calls the sixth class can also be referred to as the seventh or the ninth in some modern grammars. And we looked at this back in lesson 3. Well, anyway, the sixth class is very simple. If we think of the first conjugation stems as characterised by the ending a, and the seventh by the ending e, then the sixth is characterised by the ending o. So verbs of the sixth class form their present stems simply by adding o to the end of the root. And of course we then have to add the normal personal endings to form the present indicative. Now this is a very small class. I think it only contains a couple of verb roots, but one very frequently occurring verb is from the root kar, meaning to do. And we can now also add the imperative endings to make the present imperative verb. Okay, so if we go back now. Next is a short section where Warder introduces the word bhavant, which gets used as a title of respect, usually by Brahmin when addressing the Buddha. And this word appears to be formed from the verb root bu, which is then declined like a present participle, and we'll see this in a later lesson. But basically this means that although it's formed from a verb, it actually acts like an adjective, and so therefore declines by case and number. That said, the word's literal meaning is the fortunate one or the prosperous one, and so it's been suggested that maybe this is a contracted form of the word bhagavant, which we've seen before. Anyway, as I've said, it's mainly used as a polite form of address. The Venerable, the Honourable, or just Sir, as in, may the Venerable Gautama teach the Dharma. And now Warder returns to the T clause, which we saw previously back in lesson 1 when we looked at the nominative case. So to recap, the particle T marks direct speech. And as the particle only occurs at the end, we have to judge from context where the quote began. And sometimes this can be tricky, as with this example. Here, the negative particles na have fused with their preceding words. The first negative particle actually negates the verb, as in, I don't say. And the second negative belongs within the quote, there is not. And so we get, I don't say, this doesn't exist. So the particle T is used in a very similar fashion to how English uses the quotation mark, to indicate both direct speech and anything quoted, like a verse. But also, in Pali, this includes something which is merely thought, perceived, or just an idea. And also with some forms of definition. And it's also very common for the particle T to fuse with the word which comes before it. And when words come together like this, the sounds often change to ease pronunciation. And with Pali being a phonetic language, these sound changes are also reflected in the spelling. So when a nigahita, the ang sound, is followed by T, the mouth naturally alters to move from ang towards T. And as T is dental, so the ang becomes the dental nasal sound n. And there's a second sounds change which frequently occurs, and that is because T is actually an abbreviated form of iti. When this particle joins the end of a word that ends in a vowel, the initial I of iti causes that vowel to lengthen. And these processes are actually quite important to understand, because if we attempt to analyse the inflection of a word that is followed by T, we must realise that a long vowel may have previously been short. And also, if we attempt to look a word up in the dictionary, we have to reverse any changes that may have taken place. Well, that concludes our look at Lesson 6. Warder gives us some more vocabulary to learn, and of course, this is followed by Exercise 6. and I include a link down in the description to the answers to exercise 5 from last week. And in the next lesson, Warder will begin to discuss participles and the passive voice. And if you want to get up to speed with these ahead of time, these are also covered in other tutorials on my channel. And of course you can check out the Parley Studies blog.